IVM.
IVM Likes is an IVM production, and if you enjoy the show, check out our personal finance podcast, Paisa Vaisa. If you're like me and have no idea what mutual funds or SIPs are or how to save money like a responsible adult, you need all the advice you can get from Anupam Gupta on Paisa Vaisa. New episodes are out every Monday and Thursday.
Hello, welcome everyone to IVM Likes. I'm Sharanya. No, I'm not. I want to do this. I hope she listens to it in Sri Lanka where she is. Today on IVM Likes, we have a bunch of people on the table. We have Abbas, say hi.
Hi.
We have Amit Doshi.
Hello.
And we have
Priyanka.
Ganwani.
Yes.
Who's happy. Like she actually found a Sindhi match today this morning. So we're very happy about
That's an embarrassing story. We'll keep it for later, yeah.
after the marriage. Alright, so today we're recommending a podcast, a Facebook page, a book series and a documentary series. In the second half, we'll talk about books, how we cherish them and how we like to read them and what's our favorite memory of books. Let's start with Priyanka.
Okay, so this group that I stumbled upon, it's called TXT Tech Stories on Facebook. And the minute you get onto the page, a certain tech story just goes on, like is on autoplay. So and if you have an iPhone, you think that, okay, someone's, there's this automated tech story that's going on.
Right.
And sometimes it's about, usually it's about this, spooky thing, pass on this number, Ron, where are you? Someone's taken a scary picture of you, you have to pass this on. And there are things like that.
Okay.
But something very specifically caught my attention was basically they have this Game of Thrones centric where the characters are talking among themselves.
Okay.
And then there is Harry Potter's.
So it's
thing.
like a video with a text interface.
Yeah,
right?
like
it looks like a bunch of people texting each other.
Each other.
Ah, okay,
Yes.
all right. Yeah, that sounds kind of interesting actually.
Yeah.
I've seen some fun one of those kinds of things.
So it's the story of the book or something like that through the...
So it's a hypothetical, like someone's just made up this thing where the characters are talking among themselves, and what if they were on a chat?
Yeah.
Okay, so what would they be saying to each other? And there's this thing, so if I can... Voldemort says to Harry that, okay, I have your heart and I know what it looks like. And then, so Harry Potter is screenshotting that message and sending it to Ron, and Ron's like, what the like, run! And then somebody else is intervening. So it's like something's going on its own, and it's just entertaining. And if you have an iPhone, you actually think this chat is like live.
Right.
So it's funny, but it's...
But if you do realize, like, a lot of Harry Potter's plots would have been, like, undone if there was a phone in that world,
Yeah.
right?
Harry Potter is a great, fun story to listen to.
Yeah.
But the second you apply any kind
logic
of critical logic to it, it falls apart.
Yeah.
Did you see J.K. Rowling's tweet that got retweeted like 1 billion times? What is the most annoying question people ever ask you? How is Quidditch a sport?
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, okay.
Because Quidditch is not a sport. It makes no sense, right?
Yeah.
But apparently she keeps getting cornered by people asking her, how did you make Quidditch a sport? How did you design Quidditch? How did you make Quidditch a thing?
Yes, and it's so biased. The moment you catch a snitch, you get 150
Yeah.
points
Yeah,
like
it's-
that.
So
not
basically
done.
the previous 3 hours is pointless.
Yeah.
The people getting their jaws broken and their hands broken by that waffle. What do you call it?
Snitch.
No,
The
the
bigger
big
one.
one, the woofler.
Quaffle.
Waffle. See, I was close. It's been a while, man.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what I'd recommend.
No, wait, the quaffle isn't that the soccer style ball? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
But that's the soccer style ball, right? What is the one that hits people off? That's the bludger.
The bludger, yeah.
The bludger.
Yeah, the bludger.
Yeah. Which breaks his hand.
Yeah.
Clearly, I'm the one going to be
Yeah.
talking about fantasy
Harry
books today.
Potter
To
band.
learn more about the Harry Potter universe, go to this page. This is what
Yeah.
Sorry.
That was the text message, the text stories group on Facebook.
So it's a page you can like, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it also, of course, it leads you to a website where you can actually be a part. You can give your number and your email address, and you'll be a part of a group chat, which I haven't. I'm like too scared to be a part of that yet. So.
But then what if they start actually revealing your group chats on that
Yeah, what if?
page?
Yeah, I have no idea what's that about. So I've just left it at that. I'm enjoying this side of the story. And
Alright.
so it's, that's my recommendation.
It's
for
a
it.
Diagon Alley, the page.
Ooh,
Like the
bringing
darker it goes.
That's Nocturne Alley, the darker one. Diagon Alley was the nice one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so from there you go to the Nocturne.
Oh, okay, nice.
I mean, oh shit.
What's actually really interesting about this, I think, is that it's a new form, right? I mean, like this is this kind of storytelling doesn't happen without the proliferation in texting that we're all seeing with each other, right? And so I think that's really cool. I don't know if you guys remember this. Like a few years ago, there used to be a bunch of images that circulated about people's inboxes. So they would take fictional characters and they say like, this is their inbox. So,
superhero text.
This, right? So this is again, similarly, this is the kind of thing that just only works because of where we are right now. So that's really cool, new innovative storytelling.
I remember one of these was there's an Avengers group chat, and then Thor and Tony Stark and Captain America are having a conversation where Tony Stark is like, I'm an atheist, and Thor is like, I'm a god, right? And then Steve Rogers replies back to him saying, but I'm a believer. And then Thor is like, there you go, there you have a believer. And then Captain America is like, but this is my guy, and he sends a picture of Christ. Thor feels left out again.
Next up, we have a podcast suggestion from Abbas.
Yeah, so the podcast I'm recommending is called Song Exploder. It is a podcast that's produced by this guy called Rishikesh Hirve, and he was a musician himself. So basically what they do is every episode, an artist takes a song and takes it apart and puts it back again. It's pretty much like you're sitting in the studio with the artist, and they'll actually tell you how they came up with the song. They'll isolate the vocals, they'll isolate the musical parts, they'll tell you how they came up with the lyrics and the idea of the song. And it's really almost like an intimate kind of a feeling that you're right there with the artist. Every episode, they take a song that's either at the top of the charts or is doing really well, or they take an independent song and make sure that it people come to know about it. And at the end of the episode, they actually play the entire song in its entirety. So there is no cap on a genre of artist or the style of a song. They've done episodes with really big artists like the Gorillaz, with U2, with Saint Vincent, with the Killers. And they've done smaller episodes also. The latest one was the guys who did the Stranger Things theme. They actually talk about how they came up with that. So they've done movie soundtracks. They've done a show with Johan Johansson, who did the soundtrack for the movie Arrival. And he talks about how he came up with the theme for Arrival, the BoJack Horseman theme. So it works on two levels, because A, of course, it's a great place to find new music. If there's some music you haven't heard, you find it on this podcast. And the other is when they take really famous songs and you hear it being taken apart and put back together, you actually notice small things that you didn't before. So when they play this entire song in its entirety, you actually kind of like, I remember the Killers episode, there is this thing where the drummer is, after a little drum solo, he almost exasperates, and there's a sigh of relief which is on the recording, and you would have never noticed it if the drummer doesn't talk about it on the show. So basically every episode, it's either, if it's one artist, like for example they did a show with Saint Vincent, so she's talking about her show. If it's a band, it's usually one or two members of the band who talk about the song, and it's sometimes even the producer of the album sits in and they talk about it. It's a very well produced a podcast. Each episode is roughly around 15 to 20 minutes long, including the song that they play. And it's always interesting to see who they're gonna get next on the podcast.
Okay, so where can one listen to it?
You can listen to it on the major podcast platforms, Stitcher, Pocket Casts. They have a website. They have a very interesting Instagram page as well, which where they post images like original art based on the song that has been featured on the episode. So it's a pretty interesting podcast. Please listen to it. It's called Song Exploder.
It's really good. I've heard it a bunch of times.
Yeah.
They had Kanye on it once. It was kind of a fun episode. The YouTube episode was great that you mentioned. And Rishikesh Hirve also does one of my favorite podcasts, the West Wing Weekly. I listen to that one all the time. I mean, like, that's really, really good.
Right.
So it's a really fun show.
Okay, next up we have Amit.
Sure. Okay, so I am going to recommend so the third book of one of my favorite fantasy series is about to come out on Tuesday, the 14th of November. So in preparation of the third book coming out, I read the previous two books that had come out like 1, 2, 3 years ago, the other 1, 2, 3 years before that, and I kind of forgot what was happening. And as I was reading it, I just remembered just how awesome this series is. It's just like such a fun set of it's so much fun to listen to. So it's called The Stormlight Archive is the name of the series. The first book was The Way of Kings. The second book was Words of Radiance. And the third book coming out on Tuesday is Oathbringer. And it's an epic story. It's an epic fantasy story. It's not urban fantasy. It's complete secondary world where, like, it's not has no relationship to Earth whatsoever. Well, actually, that's not 100% accurate, but because there is so the guy who writes this is a author named Brandon Sanderson, and so Brandon Sanderson has written I think about 15-20 books right now at this point in time, and he sets all of his books in what he calls the cosmere, and the cosmere is the universe, and there's basically this dude who travels from world to world to world to world, and one of the worlds is Earth. So I guess it's not exactly that it's not this, but I mean like this is a separate world. The landscape of this is like completely different. It's like there are very few animals. Insects and crustaceans are the dominant forms of different kinds of wildlife that you see. The magic is really interesting. I mean, so one of the really interesting things about Brandon Sanderson and how he writes magic is he writes magic in a really scientific way. In the sense that magic has its rules and it needs to follow its rules. So
unlike Harry Potter.
Unlike Harry Potter. Very good point, yes. So like he actually he's actually written out 3 rules of magic that he considers are essential for magic to be fun, right? So the first one is an author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. So if you explain the magic out, right, that these are the capabilities of the magic, these are the kinds of things it can do, then you can use you can use magic to solve really, really difficult problems. But if magic in your world is like, I waved my hand and funny shit happened, then you cannot use that for conflict resolution. So basically that's what makes it interesting versus non-interesting. The second rule he has is limitations are greater than power. So the idea behind that is that basically conflict, you get conflict, right? If you are not able to do everything you want to. So having overpowered characters is not always great. I mean, like there are some great books with overpowered characters, but it's generally more fun when your character is struggling to achieve his power. And the third rule that he has is expand on what you already have before you add something new. So there are some great examples of this in his writing, right? So Brandon Sanderson, basically, he took over the Wheel of Time series that was written by Robert Jordan. He wrote the final 3 books of it. Now, one of the things in Robert Jordan's books is this idea of gateways. So gateways are basically travel portals, right? So, I mean, like you open a gateway and you can travel from one place to the other instantaneously. Brandon Sanderson, in his takeover of the book, he used the gateways in a really interesting way. What he did is he put a cannon on the back of one gateway, behind one gateway. He'd open the gateway into a new area, shoot the cannon. To close the gateway. Then he'd open the gateway into another area, shoot the cannon, open the area. So he basically turned that thing into he turned the weapon they had, or rather the travel thing they had, into like kind of a weapon. So I think that's like a really interesting way to look at how to kind of do this. But sorry, to come back to the Stormlight Archive, instead of talking about Brandon Sanderson all this much, but he's awesome. I mean, like, all of his series are great. You should read them all. But coming back to this, I'm really looking forward to this because it left off at a really interesting space. The world is basically about to face apocalypse, and people are trying to save it, and
quite close to Earth right now.
I would say not that far. Not that far. We actually have so there's a character called Odium, which I think is pretty close to a Donald Trump. Never mind. Okay. Sorry, but so I mean, like, the world is close to an apocalypse.
Does he have a tower to himself?
He has actually no. Odium does not have a tower, but the heroes have a tower.
Oh.
So there are a bunch of people with towers. It's
that will make Trump the hero that we need in this world.
It's really fun though. I mean, like the book is like, it's epic. It's got these amazing fight scenes, these amazing battle sequences. The magic is extremely imaginative. It is extremely complex in terms of the kind of different the kind of mythology that's laid out for the world.
Is it one of those chosen one hero's journey kind of a book?
No, it's actually one where, so it's interesting in this. So what it is so there's this order called the Knights Radiant. Okay. The Knights Radiant are people who gain powers over time, right? By interacting with the natural world. So as part of the natural world in this world, there's something called a spren. A spren is basically a personification of a aspect of nature. Okay. So people bond with these sprens, and when they bond with these sprens, they become Knights Radiant. The Knights Radiant was an order like thousands and thousands of years ago, which died out, and now is being reformed with the apocalypse coming again. And so the Sprens are starting to bond people again. Thousands of years ago, the Sprens were abandoned by humans, and a lot of them died because of that. So they were extremely pissed off at humans for many, many years. And now that the apocalypse is coming back again, some of the Spren are starting to bond humans again. And so the Night Radiants are forming from that. That is a extremely specific answer to a question which will make absolutely no sense if you have not read these books.
But it makes me want to read the
Yeah,
book.
I hope
makes
so.
me-
These are some of the most fun books. I mean, like after the Wheel of Time, I think this is one of the most fun series I've ever read.
Awesome. Okay, last recommendation we have for today is from me. It's called Cooked, a documentary series, a 4-part documentary series. I don't know if you'll have already watched it. Basically, it explores food from the angle of the 4 earth elements, right? Like fire, water, air, and earth. And basically, what happens through the show is Michael
I
Pollan.
almost felt like you were summoning Captain Planet right there.
The heart is missing, but the food has the heart. So basically Michael Pollan is a food writer. He wrote a book about this first, and now we have a series. So the series looks a lot like Chef's Table, where they've done like grandiose shots and like beautiful, like for example, bread dough rising from the bread. I love those shots. I'm a sucker for those shots.
It's like the second time you're mentioning it on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bread rising?
Dough rising.
Yeah. The dough rising has been mentioned once before on an episode.
Probably not by me. It's the first time I remember.
Okay.
But so what you see in the show is not only just those aspects of food which is glorious to the eye, and how transformation happens when fire, water, or air or earth is applied to food in that regard, but they also trace the history of food. You know, it's what's beautiful about the show is it goes back to the early times of man and gastronomically how we advance as a species, right? For example, about fire, he talks about how mankind was still eating raw flesh until the Homo erectus discovered forest fires, and they would scavenge into forest fires to find animals that are dead, but they also cooked. So that tasted better to them.
Right.
And genealogically, we also saw a decrease in the size of the jaw. So all that makes sense when we talk about how humans cook food and everything. There's a lot of India in it. Like if you look at food, everything obviously has to cover India. They also go to the aboriginal areas of Australia. They cover food from Morocco. So all of these, like, people come together because of food, and it's a celebration of that kind of stuff. You know, like a lot of emphasis is on the fact that cook more organic stuff. One of the principles that they stress on is eat as much as you want. Go home tonight, have an apple pie, have a burger if you want. But if you make that burger, then only eat the whole thing.
Okay.
And the thing is, if you make your own food, by the time you finish it, you just want to have a small bite and then not eat the whole thing. So they stress a lot on the importance of organic cooking, not like mass production of meat or canned stuff. Basically, they like avoid all of that because we as a species have evolved and we have a love letter to write to basically food. You know, like how they if they're raising a pig, they'll be giving it a nice tap on the back and saying goodbye to the pig as an ode, not just like as an insult. So it's very interesting to watch. The whole non-veg-veg debate is explored. The food industry and the FMCG industry, how brutal they are also. They're focusing on that. But the elements in themselves are very integral to the whole story. So what he does is basically also tries to inculcate the fact that we have a heritage of cooking food, right? So if we teach our kids and we have learned from our parents, then it's a very important thing, key skill of survival that we don't really have in the common day and age. We're so busy all the time. But they give an example of India in general. Like Indians are more busier than most people are around the world because we're working 2 jobs, we're crazy. But still people find time to cook and have that kind of bonding. So that's the nice little packaging that we have. So it's called Cooked. It's on Netflix. Check it out.
How many episodes?
4 episodes. So 4 elements.
Yeah. Well, I've actually heard of 3 of that. This is I mean, like, of the 4 recommendations, for once I know 3 of them. I've seen the Cook documentary. I know the podcast Song Exploder. And I had never heard of that. But I mean, like,
I had no idea.
I feel like I'm like, I feel quite happy with myself right now because
So
normally
nice.
I don't know any of this stuff.
Yeah. So let's go again with the round recommendation. We started with Priyanka.
The Text Stories Facebook group.
Abbas.
The podcast Song Exploder.
Amit.
The book Oathbringer, or rather the full series The Way of Kings. If you should read the first book first.
Awesome. And anything else? And I recommended Cooked. It's a documentary series on Netflix. We'll be back in the part 2 of this podcast after a short break.
Hi, I'm May, and I'm a huge fan of the indie music scene in our country. A scene that's relatively underground, even though it sometimes speaks its head overground, but there's no shortage of talent, and I get the privilege of interviewing some of the most awesome musicians on my show. I've had the likes of Euphoria, Krish Kale, Hardcore, Randolph Correa. I've had singer-songwriters, folk singers, electronic music producers, playback singers, rappers, fusion artists, instrumentalists, classical musicians, and so on. Whether mainstream or not, these people have chosen to release their original music, and these are the people currently currently shaping the direction in which our music scene is heading. Join me on my show every Monday and tune in to discover the unique talent coming out of India today. You can catch Made in India on your favorite podcasting app or our very own IVM podcast app.
Okay, welcome back to IVM Likes. We are here. We're happy to discuss our second topic now. What we wanted to talk about was our fascination with books. Like everybody who grows up likes to read books, and books play a very integral part again in our lives. Let's start with any one of you all who wants to contribute. Like, when was the first time you held a book, or you remember reading a book and being very enchanted by it?
Cool, I'll start with this. So you all remember the childcraft books that we used to get as children? No? Okay.
Not really, no.
So basically, Childcraft is this series of books which is meant for very young kids from the ages of like 0 to 5, I guess. It's a set of 12 books. They were very famous, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s. Every volume of a Childcraft book deals with a with a topic. So like one book will be the universe, one will be the human body, one will be Earth, animals, so on and so forth. And the first book of the volume was Stories and Poetry. So I am eternally thankful to whoever took that decision at Childcraft that the first book to be introduced to the child should be stories and poetry and not science or a human
Anything
body
else.
or whatever. Because I remember, because you tend to go chronologically with these books, that's the first book that my mother handed to me when I was a baby. And I, more than the text, it was actually the images that stayed with me, and these were all your fairy tales, your Boy Who Cried Wolf, Jack and the Beanstalk, and so on and so forth. That's my earliest memories of reading stories, and once I got so involved with that, I just wanted to read anything that came my way because the illustrations were beautiful, the book looked beautiful, and as kids you have this thing, you get obsessed with the book. When a kid gets obsessed with a book, they read it over and over and over again. So that Childcraft book was my first introduction to reading and to stories in general.
Sadly for me, like, your mom gave you a nice book too. My mom would give me the Bible and like there's wonderful stories in there. And it is like, if you read the Bible,
There's some
really,
pretty epic shit in there.
Yeah, but like, it depends on how much you want to believe.
Yeah, that's
but
true.
it's like the world is oyster in that regard. But so we used to go to Mount Mary, and they would have all these nice books for kids and everything. Like, small, like family come together, pray and all that. Like, whatever. And then we grew up, and I remember this one story that really turned my attention towards wanting to read more fiction was a story called That Whereby Men Live.
Okay.
It's about this angel who's dropped down to earth after he refuses to take a woman's life, and he's bare naked in the wilderness, and a man decides to help him out. So from there the story starts about how this guy, he has to learn 3 things about humans before going back to heaven.
Okay.
So, and the story was just like so amazing because it allowed me to go away from my regular schoolwork. Like, we had poetry, we had other Ratta Maro lessons basically.
Right.
But this was a story where I really wanted to learn the characters and stories about that. And then we had library periods in our
Right.
school where we would get like 1 book per week, and I would basically read everybody's books because my classmates were dumbasses. So a lot of Arlstein happened then, a lot of Enid Blyton happened, a lot of R.K. Narayan also happened then. So I think I owe a lot to Bible studies in a way. What about you, Priyanka?
I think I enjoyed reading Hindi a lot actually because we had this. So my dad and his sister, they would always pass on books to us, and then my cousins, we had this race of some sort to read as many books. And of course in English there was N. Blyton and The Secret Seven. We wanted to finish all the series during our vacations, and there was this book club that was formed amongst our cousins. So, but Hindi was something otherwise that I was very interested in, and for me, like a textbook story was like, I don't know if you guys know the Kabuli Wala.
Oh, yeah.
And otherwise when I switched to CBSE, it was Ramayana and Mahabharata, which was great because we could just, every time you did a mistake, and of course you have the Hindi teacher telling you, and not like, you have Google pronunciation today.
Right.
That time you had someone tell you how exactly. Also the background of the teacher who was from probably UP or, had done her masters from Hindi very well. So for me, I mean, I don't know if I could go back to reading Hindi now. I mean, I'm not used to it. But even during Diwali, when we have to read the Aarti, there are some things linguistically that just stick with you. So I think, I mean, it really it's really your reading habit and culture when you're brought up, like as kids.
But there's some great Hindi authors in India in general, dude. Like when we had the same textbooks again with Hindi stories, we had some, like Kabuliwala was one of those stories. And a bunch of great stories. And we never really explored that because we grew up with like...
I used to read this Hindi magazine that used to come. It was called Lotpot.
Okay.
I've heard about this.
You heard about this?
Yeah.
So Lotpot had its own characters, okay? There was this... Basically, they were riffing on Laurel and Hardy by having these two characters called Motu and Patlu, okay? And now I recently was going through... I was flipping through channels on TV and there was a Nickelodeon promo that came. Apparently now Nickelodeon has bought those characters and they make animations with them. So I was very surprised because that's from Lotpot to Nickelodeon. Motu and Patlu had a pretty good upgrade in their lives.
But it didn't have to like own the IP for those names. Like
I guess they must have. I don't
Patlu.
think Lotpot is in publication anymore, and they would have been happy to sell themselves to Nickelodeon.
Sure. So for myself, I guess so I remember being obsessed with Dr. Seuss' Cat in the Hat when I was like really young, right? And then I think after that, I kind of had a negative reaction towards books for quite a bit. For the next, I think so I started reading in the 6th standard. So up until then, I mean, like, you take the library book, the famous 5 or the 7, Sacred 7 or whatever. But I was quite into comic books at that point, right? The Tintins and the...
Tintins and Asterix.
Archie. Even some of the superhero stuff, the Batman, Superman, Spider-Man stuff. So I was quite into comic books up until the 6th. But in the 6th standard, what happened is I was told by a teacher that if I did not want to take English tuitions in the 6th standard, I needed to read at least 10 books over the summer. And I found James Hadley Chase and I found Nick Carter.
Okay. Right.
And I started reading. And I mean, like at that point, I think that summer I wound up reading like 40 books. So I blew out her 10 in like nothing. But and from then I've been like a very regular reading. I mean, like mostly... Up until I was 30, mostly mysteries and true crime and non-fiction. And after I think I turned 32, 33, then I started getting into fantasy in a big way.
But I think comic books also play a very key role in helping us read.
I love comic books.
Even in India, we had Tinkles and Chanda Mama.
Amar Chitrikatha.
Tinkle was just the best dude. Like Supandi, Chatur,
Chacha Chaudhary.
No, that was Chanda Mama. Shikari Shambhu. Shikari Shambhu is the one I'm thinking about.
Chacha, that was Chanda Mama, right?
Yeah.
No, that was Diamond Comics.
Okay.
But Chanda Mama would feature them.
Yeah, it is Chanda. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So now that we've grown up and we have all these books available
for yourself.
Man, like I'm still thinking of you as a kid holding those books with a beard on, by the way. But now we have like, I put this tweet out recently and some people were like, why are you doing this? Like I said, if you come to a book club with a Kindle, then you're going to get punched. See, already this animosity. I think because for me, books are something that I can smell, I can exchange with someone else.
That's nonsense.
But Kindle, what do you do with that?
That is stuff and nonsense.
So like
a book is nothing but a collection of words put together that tell a story. Now the form doesn't matter. The fact that you are consuming the content itself is what matters.
But through a tablet, I mean, it just takes away so much from me.
Why?
Personally, I feel flipping a page is so much.
Abbas is a fellow fantasy reader.
Right.
Are you not tired of your wrists hurting after reading those 800,000 page books constantly?
I am not actually. I actually prefer holding a fat book in my
hand. Seriously.
Nice.
Seriously, am I seriously the oldest person on this panel?
On the podcast, yes.
This is making no sense to me.
But I get. I mean, I get why people would prefer a Kindle because.
I'm sorry, but it's not just the form itself. The inventory. I mean, like, dude, go to Crossword and half the books you want, they don't have. That was a constant problem.
I mean, Flora Fountain. You go to Flora Fountain. Everything there.
That's exactly it. I want to spend like half my life looking for books instead of finding the books I know that I want to read and just get them on my damn machine, right?
And they're cheaper.
And you can, and they won't rip. They will stay no matter what. I can go back and read the same book 4 years later. To me, just, and listen, you guys are podcast producers. We're on-demand radio. Those are on-demand books.
Yeah, but then there's still such a certain luxury to it. I feel like there's holding a book or having a bookshelf in your house. It's just like it's enchanting.
Having a bookshelf in my house. Basically, you know what happened? I had a bookshelf in my house. Okay. I'll show you guys. If you check my Instagram, the first 2 pictures I put on were me getting rid of my book collection.
Okay.
I had literally in my house, I had over 1,000 books. I got rid of them. All of my chronic coughs went away because there was so much goddamn dust because of those books.
Are you buying?
Are you a convert, Navin?
No, not yet. I get diagnosed with chronic cough.
I'll attest to that because I also had like a big, beautiful bookshelf and it got a termite attack. And they ate the books, they ate the bookshelf. Yeah. And all I was left with was like basically dust. So I was like, that was like, now I get even more why people would prefer digital books. So I think I'm totally fine with digital books. Like if someone's reading
one more thing, you don't need the actual Kindle with you to read it, right? I mean, like just one other point of this.
Yeah.
I'm sitting outside somebody's office, okay, and this happens to me all the time. You go to a meeting and like, you're waiting for 20 minutes before you need to get into the meeting. Read the book. You can continue your book on your phone for 20 minutes.
Yeah, but that argument can hold for a physical book as well. You have
to carry the book with you, no?
Yeah.
So you got to carry the book with you, no?
Which is fine.
You're carrying your phone with you everywhere. You're not carrying a book with you everywhere.
Which looks smart also,
no,
I think.
But if you're...
I'll tell you because see, it's been a year of the demonetization and last year around this time, I was standing in line outside the bank and I knew it was going to be a big... effort of standing out. So it's 7 years. 7 hours I stood outside the line and only thing I had was a book with me. So I was like basically reading the book and what that indicated to the other people in the line was that I'm a smart guy. So all these aunties came to me with slips and I helped them out. I felt nice at the end of the day is what I'm saying.
The approval of strangers. Yeah. That's why you need to carry physical books.
So I think even local trains, if I'm reading a book, people look at me differently. I'm like, okay, there's a certain elegance to it, I feel.
Sure.
When you're showing off.
No, but I mean, I'm sure books have sentimental value. Would you give in to that? Like if, for the books that have...
No, absolutely. I got rid of all of them. Why would I? Dude, it's just text. Listen, it's just... there's no magic to this.
That was given to me by someone, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, gifts.
I mean, it's not about the
You're right.
I
do have some books which are given to me with gifts which have inscriptions from people. I have some of those books left. I didn't get rid of those, right? I get that kind of this, right? But on its own, it's just media. I mean, like at the end of it, it's just a form of media. I mean, like the message is in the content that's coming through. What does it matter? What is the form of media you consume it on?
The carrier, I think, will obviously be this is a never-ending debate. So
it's the same staircase versus an escalator debate. Dude.
People will
take whichever they want.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, I think you're wrong. And I think I'm right.
Okay, do you think physical books will ever be extinct?
No, never.
Well, I don't
think
know.
so.
I mean, like, think about it from an environmental perspective, right? I mean, like, paper is, you're destroying wood when you're creating paper. Now, I mean, like, granted that a lot of paper comes from trees which are specifically created to make paper, but still there is better use for wood than that, right? There's a better use for this kind of stuff. I mean, like, I think that as we get to a more digital world and we get to more renewable energy, I mean, I'm sorry, this might getting a little to this, but as we get to more renewable energy in the world electric grid mix, right? At that point in time, it just makes more sense for books to be digital, to be delivered as ones and zeros rather than as physical things which you actually have to cut down trees, pulp paper. And again, I mean, like, if you've ever been near a paper mill, man, that thing stinks. Those are not pleasant smells. And, so I mean, like, you can't really, you're killing areas of places where people can live. It's just, why do you need that when you don't? If you need it, right? When that was the way to disseminate the information, absolutely, it was valuable to do that. But today we have other options, right? Why should we? And also, the amount of books that people are reading, the number of books are increasing dramatically, but the amount of the paper sales are shrinking because people are moving to the Kindle. That is an inevitable march forward. I can't believe that I'm sitting with a bunch of 20-year-olds and all of you guys are saying that this is the... Man, wow.
We still have 20 more years to catch up. But you put this out to our listeners as well. What do you prefer?
Yeah, and please give the right answer.
Which is books in hard copy. But before we close this discussion, what is the fondest memory of a book that was given to you as a gift or as a farewell, whatever, going away kind of thing? Has anybody ever gifted you, Priyanka?
So basically, I got The White Tiger.
Okay.
I don't believe I'm saying this here, but I got The White Tiger from this guy in office where I used to work previously, and because I was aspiring to go to Bangalore at that point of time, and he just he turns out to be a secret admirer of some sort.
Okay.
I mean, I don't remember this book for the right reasons. Of course, it turned out to be a great book, and I love the book.
But I don't remember it. It's a great book. Won the Man Booker, but I don't remember.
No, I don't want to remember why it got to me. But so this guy who was a secret admirer, I got the book on Valentine's Day, and I'm like, I'm not interested in this guy. I'll finish the book in like the next 24 hours. But that's how I remember.
I have a white tiger story too, man. For example, another admirer of mine from Chennai sent me Life of Pi through mail. I didn't even ask for it. He just he sent it to me. And I'm like, thanks. And then the next day I finished reading the book in 2 days, and I took it to college to show it up because it was a hardcover with like a proper embossing and the tiger's face and everything. So a guy wanted to exchange the book. So I basically gave him my Life of Pi and got his white tiger. To this day, we haven't returned the books to each other back. It's still, his white tiger is still lying with me, and I want to give it back. I want my hardcover back.
Borrowed books are gone books.
Yeah. Adish Rani, f*** you.
So for me, a fond memory, I'd say that, just like Amit here, I was also into comic books. But I was reading the kind of stuff that would be considered kiddish or, not very mature. So a friend of mine called Merrill gifted me The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller when I was, I think, 16 or 17 years old. And that kind of really got me into reading more serious kind of graphic novel. The word graphic novel was still new back then. So it was like, this is like a story that has a beginning, middle and an end, and it's catharsis, and the character actually goes through really intense
survived the termite
stuff.
attack?
It did. Luckily, it did, yes. So the termite attack, just on a different note, they ate all the new books. They left the older books as they were.
Yeah, they prefer fresh wood.
Yeah. The newer books which I had bought like a few weeks ago were all gone. The older books stood.
Man, they ate through the entire thing. It's like one of those Aladdin episodes where they have like those B-mugs eating everything.
I know. It's just...
I was given a gift of Calvin Hobbes collection, which I kind of still value. Because it's fun, right? Every so often just break those out and spend like 20 minutes like looking at Calvin and Hobbes and like, reading their funny stuff. And so, I mean, like...
There's a Garfield handbook as well, a small one.
Okay.
It's like gags of Garfield.
Yeah. And they have themes like with the Mondays, lasagna.
But my first office where I worked, and this was after I left engineering to become a writer, and they realized how much I loved writing, and we had a boss who was almost Hitlerish, and we were all trying to get away from that company. But so the boss was not that my favorite either. He was just not there. So they gave me a book called Look Who's Back, which is about Hitler coming back to the modern day. So it was a nice inside joke that they were playing, and it also got me.
Dude, there's also a Netflix film with the same premise. It's based on that. Oh, okay.
Basically, Hitler wakes up in the modern time and age, and he's this basically lost consciousness in 1945 and woken up now. So, and then he becomes a reality TV star.
Okay.
He becomes a famous
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
That sounds like fun, actually.
Yeah. So it's a fun book. Check it out. Look Who's Back. It's from German. It's been translated to English now.
Speaking of writing, I also actually once got Stephen King's On Writing as a gift. And that was, again, something that I've kind of gone back to over and over again. It's kind of really well put together.
Not on Kindle, is it?
I'm pretty sure it must be.
It is.
It better be on Kindle.
Pretty sure it must be.
Amit will be like, what the...
Yeah.
Cool. So on that note, let's wind up the discussion. Books are awesome in any form you prefer.
Kindle better.
So and let us know what you think. What is your favorite memory related to a book? And do you still read books? How do you read books? How do you consume them? Let us know via IVM Likes. You can find us online at IVM Podcast. I'm Navin Narona.
Abbas Moment.
Priyanka.
I'm Amit.
And we're signing off. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Sorry to say, but there's been a slight delay due to the apocalypse having suddenly begun. As you can see, there's death, destruction, and chaos taking place all around us. But don't you worry, food and drinks will be served shortly, and I would recommend checking out IVM Podcasts to get some of your favorite Indian podcasts. We'll keep you going till this whole thing blows over. Thank you.